The morning air in Boston carried a crisp chill, the kind that bit at Lila Carter's fingertips as she walked her son Malik down the tree-lined streets of the city's most affluent neighborhood, her sneakers scuffing the pavement, her breath visible in the early light. At 35, Lila was a single mother who'd poured every ounce of her strength into giving Malik, 12, a better life than she'd had. Her days spent as a nurse at a local hospital, her nights filled with the hum of the city and the weight of her dreams. She'd grown up in a cramped apartment in Roxbury, the scent of her mother's cooking mingling with the sound of sirens outside, her dreams of a brighter future fueled by late nights studying while Malik slept, his small body curled under a threadbare blanket. Today, those dreams seemed within reach as they approached the wrought iron gates of Westwood Academy, a prestigious private school known for its ivy-covered walls, its sprawling campus, and its reputation for shaping the children of Boston's elite into future leaders. Malik had earned a full scholarship, his grades a testament to his brilliance. But as Lila adjusted his backpack, her hands trembling slightly, she couldn't shake the feeling that this place, with its manicured lawns and polished stone, wasn't built for kids like him. Kids from the wrong side of the tracks. Kids with skin a shade too dark for the halls of privilege. Malik's dark eyes were wide with a mix of excitement and nerves, his sneakers scuffing the pavement, his second-hand uniform slightly too big, the sleeves brushing his knuckles as he clutched Lila's hand. "You'll do great, baby," Lila said, her voice soft but firm, her brown eyes meeting his, her hands smoothing his collar, her heart pounding with a mix of pride and fear. "You belong here, Malik. Don't let anyone tell you different." But as they passed through the gates, the whispers of other parents followed them, their eyes flicking over Lila's worn coat, her sneakers, the way she carried herself, their voices low but cutting. "Scholarship kid, huh? Let's see how long he lasts." Malik's grip tightened, his small hand trembling in hers, and Lila felt a knot form in her stomach, a premonition of the storm that lay ahead, a storm she'd fight with every ounce of her being to protect her son. Inside the classroom, Malik sat at a desk in the back, his backpack a faded blue against the polished wood, his eyes darting to the other students, their uniforms crisp, their laughter sharp as they whispered about his shoes, the holes in the soles a mark of shame in their eyes. The leader of the pack was Ethan Prescott, 12, a boy with slicked-back blonde hair and a smirk that spoke of privilege, his designer sneakers gleaming, his voice a venomous whisper as he leaned over to his friends, his green eyes glinting with malice. "Look at the new kid," he said, his tone dripping with disdain, his words a blade that cut through the classroom's hum. "Bet his mom's just a maid. Probably can't even afford to eat here." The other kids laughed, their voices a chorus of mockery, a sound that made Malik's cheeks burn, his hands clenching into fists under his desk, his heart pounding with a mix of shame and anger, his eyes fixed on the floor, his sneakers scuffing the polished wood as he shifted, trying to make himself smaller, to disappear. The bullying began that first day and never stopped, a relentless tide that eroded Malik's confidence with every passing hour, every whispered taunt a stone thrown at his spirit. Ethan and his friends poured water on Malik's books, the pages curling as the ink bled, their laughter echoing in the hallway as Malik knelt to salvage what he could. His hands trembling, his eyes burning with unshed tears. They hid his backpack in the gym, leaving him to search for hours, his sneakers scuffing the polished floors, his heart pounding with a mix of fear and frustration, his voice a whisper as he muttered to himself, "I can't tell Mom, she's already doing so much." They pushed him in the courtyard, his knees scraping the pavement, his uniform tearing at the seams, their voices a chorus of mockery. "Go back to where you came from, poor kid. You don't belong here." Malik kept silent, his lips pressed into a thin line, his dark eyes fixed on the ground, his hands clenching into fists, his heart a storm of shame and rage, a storm he didn't know how to weather. Lila noticed the change in her son, the way he'd come home with dirt on his knees, his eyes downcast, his voice quiet, his laughter a memory she hadn't heard in weeks. She'd sit with him at their small kitchen table, the scent of her cooking filling the air, her hands gentle as she brushed his dreads, her voice soft but firm. "What's going on, baby?" she'd ask, her brown eyes searching his, her heart aching at the sight of his sadness, her hands trembling with the effort to stay calm. But Malik would only shake his head, his voice a whisper, his eyes fixed on the table, his sneakers scuffing the linoleum floor. "I'm fine, Mom," he'd say. His words a lie she could feel, a lie that broke her heart, a lie she couldn't let stand. She'd drive him to school each morning, her old sedan rattling as they pulled up to the gates, her eyes scanning the campus, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and determination, her voice a promise as she kissed his forehead. "You're stronger than they know, Malik," she'd say. Her words a shield, a prayer, a vow she'd keep no matter the cost. The tension escalated when Lila met with the school's principal, Henry Whitmore, a 50-year-old man whose polished suit and slicked-back gray hair spoke of privilege, his pale blue eyes glinting with a cold disdain as he sat behind his mahogany desk, his office a fortress of power, its walls lined with awards and photos of smiling, mostly white students. Whitmore had heard the complaints about Malik's bullying, but his response was a dismissal, his voice sharp, his tone dripping with condescension as he leaned back in his chair, his hands steepled, his tie a stark contrast to his white shirt. "Miss Carter," he said, his words a blade that cut through the silence, his pale blue eyes narrowing, his lips curling into a sneer. "I'm afraid your son simply doesn't fit in here. If he can't handle the environment, perhaps a public school would be more suitable. We can't coddle every scholarship kid who can't keep up." Lila's hands clenched into fists, her breath catching, her brown eyes blazing with a mix of rage and defiance, her sneakers scuffing the polished floor as she leaned forward, her voice a low growl. "My son has every right to be here," she said, her words sharp, her hands trembling with the effort to stay calm, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and determination. "He's being bullied, and you're doing nothing about it. You're supposed to protect him, not blame him." Whitmore's sneer widened, his voice a venomous whisper, his pale blue eyes glinting with a cold satisfaction, his hands unclenching as he leaned forward, his tie swinging slightly with the motion. "If Malik can't handle a little teasing, he doesn't belong at Westwood," he said, his tone sharp, his words a dismissal that cut deep, a wound that bled with every memory of Lila's own struggles, every time she'd been told she didn't belong. Every time she'd had to fight for her place in a world that didn't want her. She stood, her hands trembling, her voice a promise as she turned to leave, her sneakers scuffing the polished floor, her heart pounding with a mix of rage and resolve. "This isn't over," she said, her words a vow, a challenge, a declaration of war, a war she'd fight with every ounce of her being to protect her son. The storm broke a month later, the bullying reaching a cruel crescendo that left Malik trembling, his sneakers scuffing the pavement, his uniform torn at the seams, his dark eyes wide with a mix of fear and shame. Ethan and his friends had devised a plan to get Malik expelled, their malice a poison that seeped into the school's halls, a poison that threatened to destroy everything Lila had fought for. They stole Ethan's expensive watch, a gift from his father, and planted it in Malik's backpack, their laughter echoing in the hallway as they watched him pack his things, their voices a chorus of mockery. "Let's see how the poor kid likes jail." Ethan reported the theft to Whitmore, his green eyes glinting with a cold satisfaction, his voice a venomous whisper as he spoke, his designer sneakers gleaming under the hallway lights. Whitmore, eager to be rid of Malik, didn't investigate, didn't question, didn't care, his pale blue eyes glinting with a cold triumph as he called the police, his voice sharp, his tone dripping with condescension as he spoke into the phone. "We've got a thief at Westwood Academy," he said, his words a death knell, his hands steady as he hung up, his tie a stark contrast to his white shirt, his lips curling into a sneer. The police arrived within minutes, their boots echoing on the polished floors, their voices sharp as they entered the school, their badges glinting under the fluorescent lights. Malik stood in the principal's office, his backpack open on the desk, the watch gleaming inside, his hands trembling, his dark eyes wide with a mix of fear and disbelief, his sneakers scuffing the polished floor as he shifted, trying to make himself smaller, to disappear. "I didn't take it," he said, his voice a desperate plea, his hands raised, his heart pounding with a mix of fear and shame, his eyes darting to Whitmore, to the officers, to the door, searching for a way out, a way to make them believe him. But Whitmore's sneer widened, his voice a venomous whisper, his pale blue eyes glinting with a cold satisfaction, his hands unclenching as he leaned forward, his tie swinging slightly with the motion. "You've been a problem since day one, Carter," he said, his tone sharp, his words a dismissal that cut deep, a wound that bled with every memory of Malik's struggles, every taunt, every push, every moment of shame. "This is where you belong. In cuffs." The officers moved forward, their hands on their holsters, their voices sharp as they ordered Malik to turn around, to put his hands behind his back, the cuffs snapping around his wrists, the steel biting into his skin, the sound a sharp, metallic snap that echoed in Lila's ears as she burst into the office, her sneakers skidding on the polished floor, her brown eyes wide with a mix of rage and despair, her voice a scream that tore through the silence. "What are you doing to my son?" she shouted, her hands trembling, her heart pounding, her navy coat slipping from her shoulders as she rushed forward, her voice a desperate plea, her eyes darting to Malik, to Whitmore, to the officers, searching for a way to stop this, to save her son, to make them see the truth. "He didn't do anything. He's not a thief. You're making a mistake." But the officers ignored her, their hands steady as they led Malik away, his sneakers dragging on the polished floor, his dark eyes fixed on the ground, his hands trembling in the cuffs, his heart a storm of shame and fear, a storm he didn't know how to weather. Lila followed, her sneakers pounding the pavement, her voice a desperate plea, her hands trembling as she clutched her phone, her heart pounding with a mix of rage and despair, her eyes burning with unshed tears as she watched her son being led away. The crowd of students and parents whispering in the hallway, their voices a chorus of judgment that followed her, their eyes glinting with a mix of curiosity and disdain. At the precinct, Malik sat in a holding cell, his wrists raw, his dark eyes fixed on the concrete floor, his sneakers scuffing the ground as he shifted, trying to ease the ache in his shoulders, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, their harsh glow making his head throb, the air thick with the stale scent of sweat and despair. He'd been booked for theft, the charge a twisted narrative that painted him as a criminal, a thief, a boy who didn't belong, a narrative that made his stomach churn with a mix of rage and helplessness, a narrative that threatened to destroy everything he'd worked for, everything his mother had sacrificed for him. His mind raced, replaying the scene, Ethan's smirk, Whitmore's sneer, the cuffs snapping shut, the whispers of his classmates echoing in his ears, a chorus of judgment that followed him even here in the cold gray cell. He'd faced bullying before, but this was different, sharper, a betrayal that cut deep, a wound that bled with every memory, every taunt, every moment of shame, a wound that made him question everything he'd believed about himself, about his place in the world. Lila stood outside the precinct, her hands trembling, her navy coat slipping from her shoulders, her brown eyes wide with a mix of rage and despair, her voice a desperate plea as she spoke to the officers, her sneakers scuffing the pavement, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and determination. "My son is not a thief," she shouted, her voice sharp, her hands trembling, her eyes burning with unshed tears, her navy coat slipping further as she gestured, her voice a desperate plea, a vow, a declaration of war. "He's being framed. I know who did this. You have to let him go." But the officers ignored her, their voices sharp, their hands steady as they turned away, their badges glinting under the streetlights, their eyes glinting with a cold indifference that made Lila's stomach churn, a cold indifference that threatened to destroy everything she'd fought for, everything she'd sacrificed for her son. The storm broke when James Carter, Lila's father and Malik's grandfather, arrived at the precinct, his tailored charcoal suit a stark contrast to the gray walls, his silver hair gleaming under the fluorescent lights, his presence commanding, a force that sucked the air from the room, leaving it silent in his wake. James was 60, a billionaire entrepreneur who'd built an empire from nothing, a black man who'd risen from the streets of Roxbury to the boardrooms of Boston, a man whose name carried weight, a titan whose wealth and influence made him a legend, a man who'd kept his connection to Lila and Malik a secret at their request, wanting them to prove themselves on their own terms, to be seen for who they were, not what they came from. But now, as he strode into precinct, his polished loafers echoing on the concrete floor, his dark eyes burning with a quiet fury, his suit jacket shifting slightly with each step, his cufflinks glinting with the weight of his authority. He was a grandfather first, a protector, a warrior ready to fight for his family, a warrior who'd bring the world to its knees if it meant saving his grandson. The precinct fell silent, the officers' voices fading, their hands dropping to their sides, their badges glinting under the fluorescent lights, their eyes wide with a mix of fear and awe as James's voice boomed, filling the space with a power that made the walls tremble. A voice that carried the weight of a grandfather's love, a leader's resolve, a city's hope. "That's my grandson you've got in there," he said, his tone low, controlled, but laced with a fury that made the officers take a step back, their pale blue eyes widening, their breath catching in their throats. "My grandson, who you framed, humiliated, and tried to destroy because he dared to exist in a space you decided he didn't belong in. I'm James Carter, and I own Westwood Academy. You will release him, now." James's words hung in the air, a thunderclap that reverberated through the precinct, the crowd outside falling silent, their chants pausing as they watched through the windows, their phones raised to capture the moment, their eyes wide with a mix of awe and anticipation. Officer Daniels's face paled, his hands trembling, his badge suddenly feeling like a weight on his chest as he tried to find words, any words, to defend himself, but nothing came. His mind a blank slate of fear and shame. James stepped closer, his dark eyes locking onto Daniels's, his voice a low growl, his words a blade that cut through the officer's excuses, his hands steady at his sides, his cufflinks glinting with the weight of his authority. "You've been complicit in a crime," he said, his tone unyielding, his hands steady, his suit jacket shifting slightly as he stood taller, his presence a beacon of justice. "You've let a corrupt principal and a group of spoiled children frame my grandson, and you didn't even question it. You saw his skin and made a choice. That's on you, but I'm here now, and I'll make sure this stops, here and now." James turned to the cameras, his voice steady, his words a clarion call that echoed through the precinct, through the crowd, through the city. A call for justice that reverberated in the hearts of all who heard it. A sound that carried the weight of a grandfather's love, a leader's resolve, a city's hope. "I'm James Carter," he said, his tone firm, his dark eyes blazing with a fire that could not be extinguished, his suit jacket shifting slightly as he stood taller, his presence a beacon of hope and rage. "And I won't let this stand. My grandson will be released, now. And I'll make sure this school, this city, learns what justice means. I'll sue for discrimination, and I'll make sure every child who's ever been wronged like this gets their voice heard." We're done being silent. The crowd erupted, their chants rising like a wave, a roar of defiance and hope that shook the air, their signs bobbing higher, their voices a chorus of support. "Justice for Malik, justice now." Daniels's face drained of color, his hands trembling, his badge suddenly feeling like a weight on his chest as he moved to release Malik, his voice a whisper. His pale blue eyes darting to the floor, unable to meet James's gaze, a man caught in the storm of his own making, a storm he couldn't outrun. Malik stepped out of the cell, his wrists raw, his sneakers scuffing the concrete floor, his dark eyes wide with a mix of relief and rage, his head high despite the humiliation that still burned in his chest, a fire that refused to be extinguished. Lila rushed to him, her sneakers skidding on the concrete floor, her brown eyes wide with a mix of relief and rage, her voice a desperate plea as she wrapped her arms around him, her navy coat slipping from her shoulders, her hands trembling as she held him close, her heart pounding with a mix of love and fear, her eyes burning with unshed tears. James led them back to Westwood Academy, his tailored suit a stark contrast to the gray pavement, his silver hair gleaming under the streetlights, his dark eyes softening as he placed a hand on Malik's shoulder, a gesture of love and strength that grounded the boy in the chaos, a reminder of who he was, of the legacy he carried, a legacy of resilience and fight. The school's gates loomed ahead, the wrought iron a symbol of the barriers Malik had faced, the barriers Lila had fought, the barriers James would tear down with his bare hands if he had to. The crowd of parents and students had gathered, their voices a low hum of judgment and curiosity, their eyes wide as James strode forward, his polished loafers echoing on the pavement, his voice a thunderclap that silenced them all, a voice that carried the weight of a grandfather's love, a leader's resolve, a city's hope. "Henry Whitmore," James said, his tone low, controlled, but laced with a fury that made the principal take a step back, his pale blue eyes widening, his breath catching in his throat, his polished suit suddenly feeling like a weight on his shoulders, his tie a noose around his neck. "You've failed this school, these children, and my family. You've allowed bullying, discrimination, and corruption to fester under your watch, and you've framed my grandson to protect your own ego. I'm James Carter, the owner of Westwood Academy, and you are no longer its principal. Effective immediately. Get out of my school, now." Whitmore's face paled, his hands trembling, his tie askew, his pale blue eyes darting to the crowd, to the cameras, to the students. A man caught in the storm of his own making, a storm he couldn't outrun. The crowd erupted, their chants rising like a wave, a roar of defiance and hope that shook the air, their signs bobbing higher, their voices a chorus of support. Justice for Malik, justice now. Whitmore turned and fled, his polished loafers echoing on the pavement, his career in ruins, his reputation a casualty of his own bias, a lesson he'd learned too late. Sophie Bennett, Malik's homeroom teacher, stepped forward, her eyes wide with a mix of awe and gratitude, her voice soft but firm as she spoke to James, her hands clutching a notebook, her sneakers scuffing the pavement. "I've seen what Malik has been through," she said, her words a promise, her eyes meeting James's, her heart pounding with a mix of hope and resolve. "I'll help you fix this. I'll make sure this school becomes a place where every child belongs." James nodded, his dark eyes softening, his voice a promise as he placed a hand on her shoulder, his suit jacket shifting slightly with the motion, his cufflinks glinting with the weight of his authority. "You're the new principal, Miss Bennett," he said, his tone firm, his words a vow, a declaration of change, a declaration of hope. "Make this school what it was meant to be." The weeks that followed were a storm of change, the school's halls buzzing with a new energy, a new hope, a new promise. Ethan and his friends were suspended, forced into anti-bullying programs, their families facing public shame, their apologies to Malik and Lila, a small step toward redemption, a step they'd spend years trying to fulfill. Westwood Academy implemented diversity training, their efforts a small step toward change, their reputation tarnished, but their doors still open, a testament to the city's resilience, to the hope that lingered even in the darkest moments. James and Lila founded a scholarship for underprivileged youth, turning their pain into action, a legacy of hope and fight that would echo through the generations, a promise that the next generation would have a better chance, a better world. A plaque at the scholarship office read, "Fairness begins with respect, and courage will lead you to justice," a testament to the fight for a better future, a fight they'd never abandon. Malik returned to Westwood, his sneakers scuffing the polished floors, his uniform crisp and new, his dark eyes bright with a quiet determination, his hands steady as he walked through the halls, a boy unbroken by the world's weight, a boy who'd turned his pain into power, his grandfather's legacy a shield and a sword. He became a leader, a voice for the voiceless, a boy who'd fought for his place and won, a boy who'd become a beacon of hope for others, a promise of a better world, a world he'd fight for with every breath he had.